The old Cradian stood before the Galactic conclave like a relic pulled from a forgotten war museum, scarred chitin cracked by plasma burns, one eye replaced with a dull crimson optic, his left arm a clanking slab of military-grade prosthetic. He smelled faintly of antiseptic and old smoke. The kind that never washed out. The chamber itself was a monument to arrogance. Floating thrones of light. Delegates from 100 empires lounging in gravitic fields, sipping narcotic vapors and discussing conquest statistics the way gamblers talked odds. The Cradian veteran did not raise his voice. Do not invade Earth. For a moment there was silence. Then laughter. Loud, careless, echoing. A Varelian noble flicked his tail in amusement. Earth? The fractured primate world? They can't even agree on a single government. The High Marshal of the Empire leaned forward, his polished mandibles gleaming. Your service record is impressive, old soldier, he said mockingly. But you're letting one skirmish cloud your judgment. The Cradian's optic dimmed slightly. It was not a skirmish. More laughter. He remembered it clearly, the first contact operation decades earlier, before the Empire had a name for humans beyond class for industrial species. He had been a company commander then, young, confident, certain of victory. The humans had ugly ships, blunt designs welded together like tools instead of art. Their armor was crude. Their weapons inefficient. And yet, they do not fight to conquer, the Cradian said, his voice rough. They fight to survive. And when survival fails, they fight to make you regret existing. The Chancellor waved a dismissive limb. Enough. The expansion vote is already cast. Holograms flared to life, Earth rotating slowly, marked with targeting vectors and resource overlays. The chamber buzzed with anticipation. Another quick war. Another entry in the archives. The Cradian felt something close to despair. He had seen what happened when humans stopped believing peace was possible. The invasion began 3 cycles later. Imperial fleets translated into the Sol system with overwhelming force. Battleships eclipsed planets. Fighter screens blotted out stars. Earth's orbital defenses, obsolete rail platforms and missile arrays, were erased in hours. Imperial commanders congratulated one another. This is barely resistance. One admiral scoffed as cities burned beneath controlled orbital strikes. They're disorganized. Panicking. Human channels flooded with noise, arguments, protests, desperate evacuation orders. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. No broadcasts. No surrender. No screams. Earth went dark. Imperial intelligence flagged it as infrastructure collapse. A victory indicator flashed green across command displays. Then the first supply convoy vanished. No distress call. No debris field. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. Command blamed navigational error. A second convoy disappeared 3 days later. Then a patrol frigate failed to check in. When a search team arrived, they found the ship intact, drifting. Every crew member was dead. Not burned. Not vented. Shot. Precise kinetic wounds through armor seams. Close range. Personal. What species boards a warship with rifles? An officer demanded. The answer came too late. Human resistance bloomed like a disease, unpredictable, vicious, impossible to map. They didn't defend cities. They abandoned them. Lured Imperial ground forces into urban ruins rigged with traps so primitive they bypassed sensors entirely. Mines made from construction equipment. Explosives hidden in corpses. Snipers firing once, relocating through tunnels dug decades earlier for subways and utilities. Imperial casualty reports climbed. Not catastrophic yet, but unsettling. Humans didn't fight fair. They fought smart. Then came the broadcast. Every Imperial military channel was hijacked simultaneously, an impossibility, according to doctrine. The image was grainy, handheld, deliberately unpolished. A human sat at a metal table, wearing an old uniform with faded insignia. He looked exhausted. Calm. Dangerous. He took a slow sip from a dented steel cup. "Attention Imperial forces," he said evenly. "This is Colonel Marcus Hale, United Earth Defense Command. If you're watching this, congratulations, you've survived the opening phase." Behind him, the camera shifted slightly. Imperial banners lay piled against the wall, burned and torn, their symbols defaced with crude human writing. "Let's be clear," Hale continued. "You think this is a war for territory? For resources? For pride?" He leaned forward, eyes hard. "You bombed our cities. You killed our families. You turned survival into a question mark." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "So we've adjusted the rules." The feed cut to footage. Imperial ships breached from the inside, corridors slick with blood, cameras shaking as human soldiers moved through smoke-filled hallways. "This is no longer a campaign." Hale's voice returned, colder now. "This is a hunt." The final image froze on his face. "You are not invaders anymore," he said softly. "You're targets." The signal died. Across the galaxy, Imperial officers stared at their screens in stunned silence. On a forgotten moon at the edge of Imperial space, the old Cradian veteran watched the same broadcast. His claws trembled. "I warned you," he whispered to an empty room. Because now the Empire had made the oldest mistake in the history of war. It had convinced humans that there was nothing left to lose. Imperial doctrine treated boarding actions as desperation, last stands fought by cornered crews or fanatics with nothing left to bargain with. Corridors were sacred spaces of order and discipline. Clean lines of fire. Predictable vectors. Honor, even in death. Humans shattered that belief in the first week. They did not announce themselves. No fleet-wide alerts. No challenge codes. They arrived folded inside the wreckage of destroyed ships, magnet-locked to hulls like parasites. Sometimes they hid inside cargo containers launched deliberately off course. Sometimes they drifted for days, silent, patient, already dead to the universe until the moment they weren't. When the first Imperial cruiser went dark, Command assumed reactor failure. The truth emerged from helmet cam footage recovered later. Human soldiers cut their way through the hull with tools meant for mining, not war. They moved in pairs, then threes, communicating in quiet, clipped phrases that sounded almost bored. "Stack. Door. Flash, go." Imperial Marines charged them in formation. The humans laughed. Not loudly. Just quick, sharp exhales, like men amused by a familiar mistake. Smoke grenades filled corridors. Gravity was spiked and cut in pulses, throwing armored bodies into walls. The humans fired kinetic slugs at joints, optics, weapon mounts, never center mass unless it was personal. Traps bloomed behind them. Mines wired to medical scanners. Charges keyed to pheromones. One device didn't explode at all. It screamed, broadcasting a human infant's cry on all frequencies until panicked troops fired blindly and triggered secondary detonations. An Imperial lieutenant survived long enough to transmit a report before bleeding out. "Humans do not advance," it read. "They infect." The Empire responded the only way it knew how: escalation. Planetary annihilation protocols were authorized. Earth would be reduced to a cautionary relic, its orbit filled with molten debris and radiation storms. The order passed unanimously. The fleet aligned. Weapons charged. And Earth laughed. Imperial sensors suddenly filled with false readings, ghost cities, phantom power signatures, entire continents that weren't there a moment earlier. Targeting solutions failed. Guidance systems stuttered. Then reconnaissance probes finally punched through the interference. Earth's surface was empty. Cities stood intact but hollow. Streets frozen mid-evacuation. Billboards still flickering, advertising products to no one. Entire populations had vanished underground, into shelters bored miles deep, into oceans and asteroids and generation habitats humanity had never mentioned because no one had ever asked the right questions. What remained was not a planet. It was a minefield. When the first planet killer fired, its beams struck the atmosphere and fractured, bent by artificial magnetospheres layered like armor. The backlash fried 3 Imperial dreadnoughts instantly. Before the fleet could adjust, human ships appeared. Not warships. Freighters. Old cargo haulers, their hulls patched and scarred, engines screaming past safety limits. No weapons visible. No attempt to evade. They came in fast. Imperial commanders laughed, right up until the first freighter detonated. Antimatter, compressed and unstable, hidden inside what had once carried food and machinery. The explosion punched through shields and tore a battleship in half. The blast wave crippled 2 more. Dozens followed. They did not turn away. Human volunteers piloted them. Men and women with no expectation of survival. Names etched into hull plating. Messages scrawled in crude paint. For Chicago. For Mumbai. For my daughter. The Imperial fleet broke formation. Chaos replaced doctrine. As fires spread, a new human broadcast cut through the noise, not loud, not threatening. Casual. A human woman in a medic's uniform knelt beside a wounded Imperial trooper. Her hands were gentle, efficient, sealing a plasma burn with a hiss of synth skin. "Hold still," she said. "You'll live." The alien stared at her in disbelief. "Why?" it rasped. "You're winning." She shrugged. "War's hell. Doesn't mean we gotta be devils every second." She handed him a small data slate before standing. "Those are coordinates," she said. "Prisoner exchange. Bring anyone you want back alive. Don't be late." The clip spread like wildfire across the Empire. Hope flickered. The Empire arrived at the coordinates with a delegation of wounded and captured humans. The exchange point was empty. The coordinates marked the exact location of the Imperial Senate's mobile command station. Human strike teams were already inside. When the station detonated, it did not go out in silence. A message burned itself into the wreckage, etched by laser and explosive force alike, readable from orbit. "You should have listened." On his distant moon, the Cradian veteran closed his remaining eye. "They never stop," he murmured. "Not once they decide the war is worth remembering." The Empire did not collapse all at once. It cracked. News of the Senate's destruction tore through the hypernet like shrapnel. Governors stopped answering calls. Client species quietly pulled their fleets back. For home defense. Ancient treaties were rediscovered, reinterpreted, abandoned. Worlds that had paid tribute for generations suddenly remembered old grievances, and now they had a name to whisper with them. Humanity. Imperial propaganda tried to regain control, but it was fighting a losing battle. For every official broadcast promising stability, there were 10 leaked videos of human soldiers drinking coffee in foxholes while artillery thundered overhead, laughing as if chaos were an old acquaintance. Clips of humans painting obscene jokes on missiles before launch. Footage of captured Imperial officers treated with strict professionalism, or released outright with supplies and a warning. The message was unmistakable. Humans were not afraid. Worse, they were comfortable. The Empire attempted diplomacy as one attempts surgery without anesthesia, shaking, rushed, and already too late. A delegation was assembled in record time, wrapped in white flag protocols and escorted by every legal safeguard the Empire possessed. They chose Earth. Not the hidden capitals or orbital habitats, Earth itself. The landing zone was a ruined city, its skyline jagged like broken teeth. Buildings still bore scorch marks from the opening bombardment. Human soldiers watched from rooftops and shattered windows, weapons visible but relaxed, like predators confident their prey wasn't going anywhere. The diplomats were not met by generals. They were met by veterans. Men and women well past their physical prime, augmented limbs humming quietly, eyes heavy with memory. They wore mismatched uniforms, old patches, faded insignia, personal symbols stitched where regulations once lived. One of them, a woman with silver hair and a cybernetic jaw, took the lead. "You want peace," she said flatly. It was not a question. The Imperial diplomat swallowed. "We seek an end to hostilities." She nodded. "That was an option before you bombed our hospitals." Silence stretched. Wind whistled through broken glass. A younger human veteran leaned back in his chair, boots on the table. Good news, he said with a grin that never reached his eyes. We're still open to negotiations. Bad news? You don't get to set the price. The terms were read aloud. The Empire would dismantle its central military command. Open all historical archives, no redactions. Return stolen worlds. Pay reparations calculated not in credits, but in generations of labor and infrastructure. And then came the final clause. All war crimes tribunals will be chaired by human judges, the silver-haired woman said. Alongside representatives from species you conquered. The diplomat's mandibles trembled. This is humiliation. The woman leaned forward. No. This is accountability. The diplomat hesitated, then asked the question everyone feared. And if we refuse? The old human with a prosthetic arm, older than the rest, quieter, finally spoke. Then we keep coming, he said softly. We don't need to win fast. We're very good at long wars. We'll teach our children why your empire must never be allowed to exist again. The treaty was signed that day. But war does not end just because ink dries. Not for humans. A rogue fleet broke from United Earth Command within hours, ships crewed by soldiers who had lost cities, families, entire pasts. They ignored recall orders and burned hard toward the Empire's core worlds. Human high command faced the most dangerous enemy of all. Its own rage. Admirals argued. Politicians shouted. Generals stared at casualty lists too long to read in one lifetime. Stopping the rogue fleet would mean firing on humans. Letting it pass would mean genocide. As the galaxy held its breath, a single human destroyer translated into the rogue fleet's path. Weapons powered. Shields raised. A broadcast opened on all channels. The face that appeared was tired. Scarred. Familiar to many of the ships watching. We won, the commander said. That doesn't mean we get to burn everything down. A pause. If we cross this line, he continued, voice steady but raw, then every nightmare they believed about us becomes true. The rogue fleet hesitated. Minutes passed. Then, one by one, their ships powered down weapons and turned away. Across the galaxy, empires exhaled in relief. On his distant moon, the Cradian veteran allowed himself something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Because the most terrifying thing about humanity was not its capacity for violence. It was its ability to stop. The war ended the way all dangerous wars do, not with victory parades, but with silence and paperwork. The Galactic Empire did not fall in a single blaze of glory. It was dismantled piece by piece, its military academies converted into memorials, its fleets broken apart under human supervision and redistributed to the worlds they had once terrorized. Admirals stood trial before judges whose species they had never bothered to learn the names of. Humans watched. They remembered. They did not gloat. That unsettled the galaxy more than conquest ever could. Where the Empire had once ruled by fear, humanity ruled by precedent. Everywhere tensions flared, human envoys arrived first, not in battleships, but in scarred transports escorted by exactly enough firepower to make a point. They did not threaten. They told stories. Stories of Earth. Of cities erased and rebuilt. Of wars fought until the oceans themselves seemed tired. Of what happened when an empire mistook restraint for weakness. Most listened. Some didn't. Those who didn't rarely made the mistake twice. Years later, the old Cradian veteran stood on a grassy hill outside a rebuilt human city. Wind moved through young trees planted where ruins once smoldered. Below, children played between memorial stones, laughing loudly and without fear. Human soldiers sat openly in cafes, weapons slung casually, talking about sports, families, and complaints that sounded absurdly normal after everything. A human joined him, gray at the temples, posture of someone who had spent a lifetime bracing for impact. He offered a flask without ceremony. The Cradian accepted. The liquid burned pleasantly. You tried to warn them, the human said, gazing toward the horizon. The Cradian nodded slowly. They did not listen. The human huffed a quiet laugh. Nobody ever does. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Your people could have destroyed us, the Cradian said at last. The galaxy expected it. The human's expression darkened, not with anger, but with something heavier. Winning a war is easy, he said. You just break enough things. Winning the aftermath, that's harder. He gestured toward the city, toward life continuing in defiance of memory. We didn't want to be the monsters they needed us to be. The Cradian studied him. Yet everyone fears you. The human nodded. Good. Fear makes people pause. Memory makes them stop. As the sun dipped low, its light painting Earth's sky in golden fire, the Cradian finally understood what he had tried, and failed, to explain to the conclave all those years ago. Humanity was not terrifying because of its weapons. Not because of its fleets, or its soldiers, or its willingness to bleed. Humanity was terrifying because it evolved on a world that tried to kill it every day, and learned to endure. Because when pushed to the brink, humans did not ask how to survive the war. They asked how to make sure it never happened again. And somewhere, in the archives of 1,000 worlds, a single line was added beneath the fall of the Galactic Empire. Cause of collapse, failure to listen. The Cradian veteran closed his eyes. At last, the galaxy had learned. And it would remember. Because humanity always did.